All right, let's dive right into a really fascinating and kind of funny Ig Nobel Prize winning study. The title alone is a masterpiece. The question is simple, right? Can drunk bats still fly? It sounds like the setup to a bad joke, but believe it or not, the answer tells us something absolutely crucial about how alcohol affects our own brains, especially when we're behind the wheel of a car. So let's really get into what we're calling the drunk bat question. Now, you should know this study actually won an Ig Nobel Prize. And those awards are for research that, and I quote, first makes you laugh, then makes you think. So yeah, the premise is hilarious, but the science underneath it is absolutely serious. So why on earth would scientists study drunk bats? I mean, really. Well, it turns out the reasons are actually incredibly practical. See, this isn't just some weird scenario cooked up in a lab. In the wild, fruit-eating bats are constantly sipping on alcohol from fermented fruit. It's just part of their diet. They've literally evolved to handle a bit of a buzz. But the big question for scientists was, how much is too much? At what point do their critical survival skills just fall apart? And that's what makes bats the perfect subjects for this. Think about it. They navigate a complex, three-dimensional world in the dark at high speeds using only sound. This makes them a super sensitive model for what happens when our own brain's spatial processing starts to fail, which, you guessed it, is exactly what makes drunk driving so incredibly deadly. Okay, so how did they actually test this? Let's get into the flight test itself and see how they designed this whole experiment. The method was pretty straightforward, really. The bats were given different doses of alcohol mixed with sugar water. Then they were released into a dark room set up with a tricky obstacle course. High-speed cameras and sensitive microphones tracked their every single move, from their flight paths to the individual clicks of their echolocation. Now here's the really important part. The goal wasn't just a simple yes or no. The researchers weren't asking, can they still fly? They were asking, how does their flight start to break down? They wanted to measure, to quantify exactly how their navigation and their flight patterns got worse and worse as the alcohol level went up. And this brings us to the results. What did they actually find? When a bat has had a few too many sips of fermented fruit, what's the very first thing to go? At the low alcohol levels, the bats, well, they did pretty well. They could still navigate the course just fine. But when the scientists looked at the high-speed footage, they saw something really interesting. The bats were making tons of extra tiny little corrections to their flight path. So the skill was still there, but you could already see it was taking a lot more effort to maintain it. Then we get to the medium concentrations. And this is where things started to go wrong. The bats began clipping the obstacles, and their echolocation, their sonic GPS basically, it started to get all unstable. You know, those steady rhythmic clicks they use to map out the world? They started becoming erratic, which means they couldn't get a clear picture of their surroundings anymore. And finally, at the highest concentrations, this part is just wild. The bats could still generate enough muscle power to take off, flapping their wings, getting airborne, no problem at all. But their ability to navigate, it was completely gone. They just couldn't avoid crashing. So what is all this telling us? It points to a very, very specific kind of failure. It wasn't the machinery, the wings, that broke down. It was the guidance system. You could call it the broken internal map. And this, right here, is the absolute key finding of the whole study. We usually think of being drunk as something that messes with our muscles, right? Makes us clumsy. But for the bats, their wings worked perfectly fine. What failed first was their brain's internal map, their ability to judge distances, to understand space, and to predict what was going to happen just a fraction of a second in the future. One of the researchers put it perfectly. They said, they are able to move, but the world is updated with a delay. Just think about that. It's like you can see the obstacle, you know it's there, but your brain is getting the information too late to actually do anything about it. You're living with a time delay. So, okay, fascinating stuff about bats. But what does this have to do with us? Why does any of this matter to you? Well, the implications are huge. This study perfectly reframes the danger of drunk driving. Being impaired isn't a failure of willpower. It's not about not trying hard enough to be careful. It is a physical, measurable delay in your brain's calculations. Your brain's processor speed literally slows down, making it impossible to navigate the world safely. So, the drunk bat gives us some crystal clear takeaways. It shows us why just being careful is totally useless when the part of your brain that assesses risk is fundamentally broken. And maybe most importantly, it proves that your judgment fails long before your physical motor skills do. You feel fine, but you're already impaired. And that really just leaves us with one final sobering thought. Bats have spent millions of years evolving these incredibly sophisticated brains, fine-tuned for high-speed navigation in total darkness. And even their brains can't handle this catastrophic failure of judgment. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, if their highly specialized brain can't be trusted after a drink, why on earth would we ever trust ours?